Good afternoon once again. I'm Patrick Alcedo. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Dance, and I'm deeply honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ricardo D. Trimillos. Although I have not studied formally under Rick, I consider him to be a mentor. Many years ago, when I began my graduate studies in Southern California, Rick generously offered to help guide my training in Philippine Studies and Philippine Dance Scholarship. For those of us in Philippine Studies, Rick is a highly respected scholar and a valued educator whose body of works did not only shape the field, but who also mentored many Filipinists who have shaped and are shaping the study of and about the Philippines in situ and beyond. Born to Visayan parents, his mother is from Iloilo and father from Aklan. I'm also an Aklanon, yay. Mga Bisaya in the room represent. Dr. Trimillos is a Filipino-American who was born and raised in San Jose, California. He is Professor Emeritus at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Honolulu, Hawaii. Before his retirement, he was Professor of Ethnomusicology at the Music Department and Chair of Asian Studies at the School of Pacific and Asian Studies. His area of research is broadly based and includes the expressive arts of music, dance, and theater in their social environments. His research foci include Asian performance, Hawaiian music and dance, and the music of Muslim groups in the southern Philippines. His theoretical trajectories include ethnic identity, the arts and public policy, and issues of gender in the arts of the Pacific and Asia. He is a recognized resource for world music in public education. His publications in 3 languages include articles on Asian Americans, world music in higher education, cross-cultural implications for the arts, interrelationships of the arts, Philippine ritual, and Hawaiian music. He has been consultant to a number of governments, including the former Soviet Union, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Hong Kong, in the area of arts and public policy. He lectures regularly at German universities. A performer and scholar, he has served as scholarly consultant to the Brooklyn Academy of Music and the Asia Society for projects concerning Asian and Asian American performance. He is a past commissioner for the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts of Hawaii, a national panelist for the U.S. National Endowment for the Arts, Heritage Programs, and advisory board member for the Smithsonian Institute Folklife Center. His graduate degree is from San Jose State University in Music and English Literature. The MA in Music Ethnomusicology was completed at the University of Hawaii in Manoa under the auspices of the East-West Center. He completed a PhD at the University of California, Los Angeles in 1972. Other institutions for advanced studies include the Ateneo de Manila in the Philippines and the University of Cologne in Germany. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Ricardo D. Trimillos.
Magandang umaga sa iyong lahat. O magandang gabi sa iyong lahat. Bonjour. Je voudrais donner les félicitations et pour cette occasion de l'Université Hawaii et pour les collègues d'art. Aujourd'hui, je fais l'intervention en anglais, malheureusement, mais c'est ça. Good day. I'm very happy to be here. I bring greetings from the University of Hawaii and the colleagues there. I'm very happy to be here, and as I said, the presentation will be in English. I would like to thank, first of all, the York Research Center for sponsoring my visit, and for Patrick Alcedo for having the good sense to invite me. Okay. The talk is entitled Places and Spaces for Dancing and Musicking Filipinicity, Imagining Barangay, crew, ethne, and nation. And I will explain those terms as we progress through the talk. I am pleased and honored by this invitation to share some insights about Filipino identity, particularly in the context of an overseas, Anglophone, North American setting related to the occasion of the premiere performance of the dance theater production, Luz Viminda, directed by your colleague, Patrick Alcedo. As is often the challenge in a keynote presentation, I attempt to speak to the diverse interests of the group assembled here by suggesting how a consideration of music and dance performance can be relevant to a wide diversity of interests and themes in cultural research and area studies. I trust during this exercise of puddle jumping, I don't lose you or leave you with too many splashes. The way in which we hope to proceed is in this outline. I'll define Filipinicity, and then look at the idea of performance in the service of identity. Then I will take three aspects of Filipinicity that relate to performance and explain them. Then I want to look at the concept of place and materiality as related to this topic. Then space as potentiality, another theoretical idea. And then finally, Filipinicity in the diaspora, particularly in relation to North America. Filipinicity. There is a certain irony in Filipinos embracing a colonialist and modern construction of a nation state called the Philippines, which provides much material for postmodern criticism, particularly for heritage scholars, that is, those of Filipino ethnicity abroad, such as myself. However, I am more attracted to early 20th century Filipino intellectuals and their intuitive embracing of an overarching relationship based upon culture. Such was the interest of Antonio Molina and the term he coined Filipinicity. Whoops, what happened? Oh, there it is. Briefly defined, Filipinicity is the ability to be Filipino or to perform Filipino identity at any time and in any place. And if you read my abstract, you'll see how I try to tease that out, which I've also discussed in other publications. The collapsing of time and place is especially useful for contemplating a Filipino identity in the diaspora, a setting increasingly relevant in the global present when the greatest resource for export from the Philippines consists of Filipino bodies, as your colleague Ethel Tungguhan has written in many of her studies. The Filipino, as exotic in its original meaning, may call upon a variety of strategies to realize Filipinicity in various non-native, non-indigenous settings, be it coastal Mexico, the North American sites of San Francisco, Chicago, and Toronto, or even further afield in Prague of the Czech Republic or in Almaty in Kazakhstan. Filipinicity as a touchstone for Filipino identity tends to be inductive rather than deductive and not exclusionary or unique. For example, when Filipino hospitality in terms of food and drink are beyond what is expected in the North American mainstream, the observation is often made, this hospitality is so Filipino. However, an overabundance of food is not unique to Filipino hospitality, but is also encountered among such groups as the Greeks and the Ghanaians. Further, the term Filipinicity valorizes subject agency, that is, it is an active aspect, while the formation Filipino-ness is largely descriptive of an established state or a static role. Whether or not Filipinos can claim a feature as singular or unique is less relevant here than that it is invoked as an ascribed part of Filipino ethos. In the next part of this discussion, I consider how Filipinicity plays out in terms of performance and identity. One aspect of identity often invokes history, that is tradition. So may I make a claim now for historical relevance. The performance is a touchstone for Filipino identity. The Filipino engagement with performance is a theme that is evident from the very first encounter of Europeans and Filipinos, or rather more accurately, with Sugbu or Cebu natives. There was no Philippines then. These pre-colonial peoples were not part of a national imagination named after King Philip of Spain. Pigafetta, accompanying Magellan around the world, provides two reports of performance he observed. The first one is a secular music performance for entertainment for the Magellan crew. He describes in detail 3 girls who enter the banquet hall or the banquet room and play on 3 different instruments, 1 large gong, 1 drum, and 2 small tuned gongs. So there's 3 people, 4 instruments. Now, the description says they play for a while and then stop, so it is obviously part of an entertainment setting. Datu Humabon, who was the host, already manifests a level of hospitality that is a much-cited embraceable characteristic for Filipinos. Also significant is the inclusion of music and dance performance as a feature of hospitality, which still pertains today. As recently as the 1950s in Cebu, large gatherings included accomplished performers of the responsorial song-dance genre of Balitao. The 2 performers, usually a female singer-dancer and a male singer-musician playing either harp or guitar, engaged in repartee, centering around male-female relationships that ranged from the circumspect to the flagrantly sexual. At most present-day Filipino gatherings, the presence of the karaoke machine and the expectation that everyone will contribute at least 1 song is practically de rigueur. Even in exile, the Marcoses are documented taking turns in a lively karaoke session in Makiki in Hawaii. Music and dance as entertainment then, and as an aspect of hospitality, is of long standing in the Philippines. The second incident report from the Pigafetta document is more interesting for our purposes, and I will spend a little more time with it, because it describes a ritual for sunrise. In this report, the writer describes that there are 2 female shamans, or babaylan. Each holds a musical instrument in one hand and a streamer or banderita in the other hand, dances and sings to welcome the sun coming up in the morning. So all of these elements, if you can sort of keep them in the back of your mind as I go through the next part of this talk. From this account of female shamans greeting the sun with song and waving fluttering flags, I select 1 ritual feature to discuss, greeting the sun, and 1 aesthetic feature, the use of flags, which are reported as flags or perhaps streamers. I find these 2 particularly germane, that is, the ritual and the aesthetic, suggesting a continuity manifested in present cultural practices, providing tantalizing speculation for performance as historical memory and a particular logic of practice. The ritual aspects present 4 themes of interest. The regularized temporal iteration. Second, the combination of sound and movement, here song and dance. Third, which I will not discuss, readied communication with the non-mortal world. And 4, a temporality beyond human control, the sunrise. In sum, the 4 themes, of which I'm only going to talk about 3, focus upon repeatability, the total use of the body, a social interaction not limited to human beings. As a first foray into the way a past contextualizes a present, I draw upon a number of anecdotes. For temporal iterations. Iteration in Filipino life can be macro-chronometric, such as the annual sequence of observations for Catholics that include ones that are pan-regional, such as the observance of Holy Week, or local, such as the fiesta for a particular patron saint, and for the Muslim Filipino, that includes Hari Puasa to celebrate the birth of the Prophet, and the Hajj, season of pilgrimage to Mecca. These are repeated over and over again as iterations. However, it is in the micro chronometric iterations that I find the most interest. the repetitive act becomes a performative aspect of religiosity in the Philippines. In the so-called Christian lowland Philippines, for example, it is quite common for taxi and jeepney drivers, all male, to make the sign of the cross as they pass any Catholic church. I noticed that also on airplane takeoffs, almost all the Filipino passengers, as the plane is taking off, also make the sign of the cross. Although it is a religious signifier, it is part of the iterative performativity for the human person. It doesn't matter if you do this or not, but you feel better when you do this. Iteration behavior need not always be religious. For example, the raised eyebrow is an often repeated action to acknowledge the presence of someone, whether familiar or not. In a context of mixed ethnicities, such as here or Toronto Airport, the raised eyebrow is often the acknowledgement or a recognition of a fellow Filipino among a group of mixed nationalities. It also gets you into the fast security line. Okay, the second aspect of this is the combination of sound and movement. In scholarly discussion of Southeast Asia traditional performance, including the Philippines, the inseparability of music as sound and movement as dance is affirmed. And in this era of decolonization, presented as evidence for the shortcomings of Western categorization. We did not have the idea of music and dance until the English colonial said, there's something called music and something called dance. You can't put them together. Here, the lack of a term that includes both music and dance, other than Gesamtkunstwerk, which really doesn't work for Filipino stuff, so that many genres of Asian performance are described as combinations of music and dance, rather than as a conceptual unity of movement and sound, such as wayang wong. That's a unity, and that's everything, music, theater, dance, and music. The unity of movement and sound, or dance and music for our purposes, requires the engagement of the entire body in performing. And you will see this tonight, those of you who are going to the performance. For example, in the lowland dance Maglalatik from the area of Laguna, the performer both dances and provides sound by striking a set of coconut shells affixed to different parts of the body. Now, like the shaman dance reported by Pigafetta, the performers use an extension of the body, in this case, the handheld coconut shell, as a dance property. And like the shaman dance, the performers are monogendered, that is, all male. Originally, the percussive sound of coconut shells was the only rhythmic accompaniment to this dance. When the dance was adapted for staged performance, instrumental music of the rondalia was added, but originally it was simply the percussion. Similarly, for the all-female dance Dugso from the highlands of the southern island of Mindanao by the Talaandig, the sound is produced by the rhythmic stamping of feet and the pellet bells attached to the performer's body that sound as the body moves. Any ritual performance that involves song and dance, like the sun ritual described by Pigafetta, involves the totality of the body, the internal body through the breath that produces song or speech, and the external body that produces musical sound and visual kinetic design. Ritual as performance partakes, this is ritual now, performance partakes of the same features. One folk ritual in Philippine Catholicism involves the entire body. The celebrant traverses the length of the church of the nave while reciting prayers. So the celebrant is on her knees, sort of doing this down the nave, and either repeating the rosary or Our Father, so that she's producing sound and movement at the same time. And even more extreme manifestation of the inner and the outer body in ritual are the Holy Week flagellants, who reenact the suffering of Christ on the Via Crucis by literally bringing the inner body, that is blood, to the outer body by whipping their backs with the local version of the cat of nine tails until they bleed. Now, the cat of nine tails makes a sound, so it produces sound. The performer uses the cat of nine tails as an extension of the body, here the whip, and again, all the performers are female. are all male. This gender thing we'll come back to again. Okay, going on to the aesthetic features, those ones we're talking about the ritual. The aesthetic features, I just selected one because I found it so fascinating. The idea of fluttering. This is this kind of thing. Although there are a number of aesthetic features that we could draw from the Pigafetta account, I select one, the holding of flags or banners during performance. Although there may be some question about the term because in the translation it was banderitas, which could mean flag or could mean streamer. And they correspond to a central aesthetic feature found in the Philippines. This is the employment of a flexible extension of the body that is not fully under control of the performer. I'll say that again. This involves the employment of a flexible extension of the body that is not fully under control of the performer, which I term controlled interdeterminacy. Thus, when the hand moves a streamer in space, the flexibility of the streamer allows the tailed end to describe its own trajectory. And you can even do this with paper. I'm moving this part, but this part I have no control over. Although the performer can exercise control over the general trajectory, the nature of its fluttering is not completely controllable. The aesthetic of fluttering elements that move independently of the main body are documented for Tagalog and Cebuano communities in 1595 in the Boxer Codex, which reports cords suspended from shirts or blouses outfitted with gold weights at the ends to enhance their swing as the person moves. Until recently, the fluttering as aesthetic was evident throughout the Philippines using decorations or gayakan of streamers on jeepneys, these semi-private mass transportation vehicles which your president is trying to eliminate, that flutter in the windstream created by the jeepney's airstream. So this fluttering business. So you see he has both flags and streamers on his jeepney. The fluttering flag or streamer at its most intriguing transformation in performance is encountered in the Easter Sunday Salubong of Angono, Rizal, and the shaman ritual of the Subanan of Mindanao that features streamers of abaca fiber held in each hand. In both the Tagalog Catholic and Lumad cases, the feature of female practitioners performing at sunrise is very similar to Pigafetta's reportage of 1520. The aesthetic feature, the fluttering flags or streamers, is even more fascinating. The flag or streamer is the flexible extension of the arm that flutters, only partially controllable by the performer. For the Lumad Subanan, the shaman holds several streamers in each hand. This is a theatricalized version. During this song dance ceremony to greet the sun. Movements of the arms are very similar to the brief descriptions provided by Pigafetta in 1520. In the Angono Salubong, which is done on Easter Sunday to greet the sun on the day of the resurrection of Christ, a small flag or banderita is held in each hand during the dancing and manipulating of the song dance ceremony called bati. Again, the description of the performer singing while dancing and manipulating flags in Angono is very similar to the Pigafetta account. While I would like to prove a direct linear relationship between the Cebuano shaman performance of 1520 and the present-day performances of Subanan uplanders and Tagalog lowlanders, I can only point to the great similarity and suggest, again, an underlying shared logic of practice. The performed ritual performed by Pigafetta in his putative present-day counterparts suggests three major themes that are central to Filipinicity in the performance. Iterative behaviors, as in ritual, the unified production of movement and sound, dance and music, by the single performing body, and the recognition of and creative exploitation of controlled indeterminacy. Thus, performance is one domain of Filipinicity whose identifiable features alone, or in combination, contribute to being Filipino at any time, in any place. We go now to the first sort of theoretical idea, place and materiality. And this is for Professor Custono. Home place is an important marker of Filipino identity in such contexts of population mobility as theorized by Cuba and Humon. I like the notion of place, particularly home place, as a tangible and experiential locale, as suggested by Gombrich, because it resonates with Filipino practice. The discovery abroad of the stranger as townmate or barrio mate often leads to social ties. And this is the idea of the barangay, or the micro unit, the smallest social unit, not the family unit, but where you live is barangay. The typical immigration involved a critical mass of people who either related or who were either related or townmates, as in the case of Toronto and its significant population of Central Filipinos. The 2014 International Hip Hop Championship got much attention here because the all Filipino-Canadian crew, Brotherhood Adult, I think they're from Vancouver, won it. The Filipino identity was often mentioned, particularly in the American press and the Filipino-American press. Often identity, it can be in overseas context, is reinforced by affiliative association. So Filipino-Canadian, right? I mean, they're not just hip-hop guys, they're Filipino hip-hop guys, okay. Or by affiliative organizations such as the Sons of Naga, the city of Naga in the southern Luzon, in the center of the Bicol language. Or the sense of home place is equally important for those in the Philippines. During holidays, particularly during Holy Week preceding Easter, everyone goes home, which means to a place to their family's origins, often fictive, usually in the rural towns outside their metropoles, where many had reasons to relocate for career or lifestyle. When I first went to the Philippines to do research in the 60s, nobody was from Manila. Everybody went home to the provinces. Specific home places are invoked also in music and dance. For example, the popular dance with bamboo castanets, of which you'll see two tonight, that I used as an example is Hotomocandenya, which references the town of Moncado in Tarlac in northern Luzon. In music, the classic Tagalog kundiman, actually it's the Balitao, art song, Mucha ng Pasig, the Pearl of the Pasig River, by Nicanor Abelardo, 1923, refers to the Pasig River that carries connections that are historical, political, economic, and spiritual. Another useful use for place as descriptor references physical venues for performance. In this aspect of place, there is a contrast between the urban-oriented presentational performances for rock concerts, symphony orchestras, etc., and the more rural-oriented performances such as Holy Week Passion plays, the Sinakolo, Christmas reenactments, and the Moro Moro folk plays involving Muslims and Christians during the time of the Crusades. These traditional genres use temporary places and structures for performances. For example, the Sinakolo Passion plays and the Moro Moro theatricals take place on temporary stages or structures of bamboo erected in the town square or on a vacant lot. This was a calvario for doing the pabasa or passion. After this event, the structures are dismantled and the bamboo poles return to utilitarian purposes, such as scaffolding, temporary sheds, or footbridges. There was one town in which they took the footbridge out to make the calvario so nobody could cross the stream until the Holy Week was over. Another form of transiency is encountered in the Diaspora, in which a festival procession can temporarily turn a hotel ballroom into the multiple locations of town square, main street, and church for the purposes of a procession. The movement and bodies are authentic, but the home place setting is virtual and imagined. The transient and the ad hoc relate to a more general Filipino practice of the transitory use of public space. Anthropologist Richard Stone claims it as a principle that applies to such phenomena as drivers creating their own lane, penitentes taking over an entire street of a town, or farmers occupying one lane of the national highway to dry their rice harvest. Thus, place as locale conceptually communicates permanence and foundation, while place as venue resonates with the transient, the impermanent, and I argue, therefore, the spontaneous and the ad hoc, additional performative features for Filipinicity. We move now on to the second theoretical idea of space as potentiality. While I use place to denote the material, the physical and the geographical, I use Morley and Robinson's definition of space as symbolic for the delimiting of cultural communities. And this, again, resonates with some of the work done here by Lisa Drummond and Ranu Basu. Within this rubric, I consider space as potentiality and an opportunity for performing both culture and community, here using music and dance. In this discussion, I briefly describe spaces within the home place and then give a greater attention to spaces in the diaspora. Returning to the Pigafetta account of Babaylan greeting the sun, part of Filipinicity is sacred space. In the setting of the Philippines, the sacred space is not necessarily a religious space, but is a place where beliefs about world religions, experiences of the spiritual, and local notions of the sacred can occupy a conceptual or behavioral space simultaneously, sequentially, or separately. Whence signal comprehensive consideration of sacred ritual in the Philippines provides many examples of the simultaneous, many of which Filipinos are already familiar. However, one less known instance is the Festival of Our Lady of Kaysasay in the southern Tagalog region of Batangas. Its celebrants are Sino-Filipino Catholics, or Chinoys. Our Lady of Kaysasay relates to the aspect of the Marian Stella Maris, or Star of the Sea, and in this community is co-celebrated as the Chinese Taoist Buddhist Matsu, goddess of the sea. Given the mercantile and seafaring history of Chinese Filipinos, this conflation and simultaneous incorporation of two world religions into a domesticated and localized practice for a specific marked population, that is the Sino-Filipino or Chinoy, is a rich cultural and historical instance of identity within Filipino society. Here is a space that is spiritual but not religiously exclusive. A second significant space is the reinforcement of community, best exemplified by the town fiesta, which, although related to a patron saint in the Catholic panoply, generates an atmosphere that is more secular than sacred, although the two are never completely separate in understanding Filipinicity. For example, in the town fiesta, non-Catholic residents, which can include Protestant Christians, Taoist and Buddhist Chinese, unconverted and indigenous aborigines, and increasingly Muslims who are immigrating from the south coming north. Often these marginal groups are major funders for based upon a system of patronage in which Chinese Filipinos are particularly involved, sometimes occupying leadership positions. One such reinforcement of community, of course, is the Ati-Atihan of Kolibo, intensely researched and documented by your colleague, Patrick Acedo. Although built around the veneration of the Santo Niño, or the child Jesus, the bulk of time and activity is given over to carnivalesque behavior with sooted bodies, various stages of undress, elaborately costumed mass dancing units, and public intoxication. The Kalibu Ati-Atihan has become a major domestic tourist destination. It manifests a host of similarities: unity of music and dance within a single Ati-Atihan body, the sacred and the secular together, the enactment of the lowland and the aboriginal, and visitors as recipients of open hospitality and of commodified tourism. A third major space is commoditized entertainment. Historically, the turn of the century vernacular zarzuela and the American-inspired vaudeville occupied this space. Later, performance in clubs and drinking establishments provided training and a pool of commercial musicians who were able to export their services throughout Asia, where the announcement of a Filipino band in Hong Kong or in Kota Kinabalu was an indication of high-quality performance of international commercial genres, including jazz, MOR, and pop. Today, hip-hop, rap, and dance hall delivered by Filipino bodies inhabit this space, both in the homeland and abroad. And again, you'll see one of those tonight. A fourth major space is a national cultural one, largely in the service of the nation as state. The Philippines National Cultural Project, manifested by the Cultural Center of the Philippines and the National Council on Culture and the Arts, Commission on Culture and the Arts, has two major tracks. One is a civilized Philippine engagement with global genres, both elitist, as in opera or ballet, and commercial as in hip hop or jazz. So if you go to the cultural center, you will see ballet performances, the symphony orchestra plays, and you'll see international pop and hip hop groups. A second is fostering an awareness of and a pride in the diversity and quality of indigenous expression. In the words of the National Commission on Culture and the Arts, quote, we have a respect for the people's cultural wisdom which defines their identity, unquote. It is this fourth space and its tropes of cultural wisdom and identity that are useful for considering Filipinicity in the diaspora, the last topic for today, with specific production of the Luz Viminda in mind. So, practicing Filipinicity in the diaspora. Filipinicity in the diaspora reflects ways in which a minority society operates within or against a hegemonic majority. In this regard, I find the model by Mark Slobin, cited here, to be useful. Briefly, in his examination of music practices of minority cultures in the United States and Europe, Slobin considers behaviors and practices within the minority community itself to be the purview of what he calls the subcultural. In contrast, the ways in which the minority community interfaces musically and culturally with its hegemonic host society becomes an ethne and is the purview of the intercultural. He identifies a third category, the supercultural, which problematized global intervention in support of minority cultures, such as the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage Initiative. However, for our purposes, I treat the subcultural and the intercultural as a dyad, using Filipinicity as the limiting case. Although I had planned to discuss quotidian and public settings by contrasting the karaoke party and the folk life dance concert abroad, time constraints allows only for a discussion of the dance concert. So you'll have to come back for the karaoke party. Okay, the dance concert, and this relates to what you're going to see this evening or the other two performances. The dance concert as space for Filipinicity in the diaspora. In earlier studies that published that Patrick alluded to, I have considered a number of mediums for the performance of Filipinicity. Here I focus upon the medium of stage and stage music and dance as a space for Filipinicity. The Philippines popularized this medium through its folkloric troupe Bayanihan, which established a successful international dance diplomacy during the post-Pacific War period. Their success as a national folkloric troupe inspired other companies, notably Mexico's Ballet Folklorico and Senegal's Ballet du Sénégal. Much has been written on the outcomes of the Bayanihan project, notably the diasporic experience in Bienvenido Santos' short story, The Day the Dancers Came, and the problematics of authenticity and minority representation written by Kadar. Referencing Slobin's model, I focus upon intercultural dimensions, that is, the relationship of the minority overseas Filipino community with a general mainstream host community. I find three perspectives a signal in this relationship, those of the the presenter, the heritage observer or audience member, that is the Filipino audience member, and the non-heritage observer. In terms of audience members as observers, Slobin's model suggests two contrasting subsets. The heritage observer, who identifies as Filipino, a subcultural positionality, and the non-heritage observer, the intercultural positionality. I argue that the space of the dance concert offers different meanings for each category and different responses to the features that I have discussed previously. Thus, each positionality occupies a different intensity of engagement with the notion of Filipinicity. And the comments that follow are based upon, a half century of observation and presentation of Filipino performances. For the presenter, the most intensive engagement lies with the presenter. These include the directors and the performers. The proscenium stage levels the playing field for any ethnic presentation, both symbolically and physically. It carries associations of the elite, the artistic, and the skilled for the host culture. It establishes a clear separation between performer and spectator, in which the presenter assumes a position of authority and leadership, constructing a skillful performance narrative. Again, of those of you who have been in performances in the Philippines, like in Sa Provincia, everybody comments or they'll come in and dance with the people. It's not a performance of an audience and a group of performers. Anybody can jump in at any time. The concert is a statement about progress and accomplishment in civil, economic, and political citizenship for the minority community. In a sense, it is a triumphalist moment in a non-contested space for displaying cultural difference. It's not contested. People don't demonstrate outside concert halls, and you have to pay to get in. To quote the dancer of a San Francisco-based Filipino troupe, "We have arrived." However, the presenter is faced with the two-pronged challenge of effective cultural presentation, is faced with the two-pronged challenge of effective cultural representation on the one hand, and the successful artistic presentation on the other. As critiques of Bayanihan show, the challenge is to find the balance between the cultural artifact and artistic statement. For the presenter in the Diaspora, meeting that challenge entails personal risk. Going on to the heritage audience member, that is the Filipino audience. For a heritage audience, the space can carry other meanings. The public performance is a socially sanctioned space to exhibit cultural citizenship and to perform Filipino identity. For the Filipino, the concert enables a revisiting of the cultural self, framed in embraceable imagery. Everything is positive, there's nothing negative here. His expectation is for positive aspects of his culture, or her culture, to be foregrounded, including depictions of hospitality, projections of charm and joie de vivre, and narratives of heteronormativity. The girl is always being chased by a boy, never by another girl. While the act of attendance itself is a performative statement of identity, the concert also sanctions Filipino language as in an intercultural setting, that is, using Tagalog during official opening remarks, as I did today. Although the event opens up a space for Filipinicity, its environment includes surveillance by the non-heritage other. The heritage person is aware, this is pakapwa, of the presence of these others. The awareness can modify usual homeland behavior in a form of self-policing. Such modifications include not commenting on the action during the performance, not bringing infants to the event, and not eating or drinking in the theater. These are things that in Western theater is not done. At the same time, this awareness can empower acts of identity, and again, you will see this evening, such as wearing the formal Barong Tagalog shirt for men, or using Tagalog to greet friends, although everyone speaks English. Such interactions take place in the lobby as a diasporic safe space, a kind of reversal of Goffman's back performativity. Lobby mingling as a meta-performance also sets the cultural register. Is the audience mostly Filipino or mostly the arts community? And you're going to act differently depending on who's in the majority. Through an in-lobby assessment, the heritage attendee may adjust the register of his Filipinicity. Going on to the non-heritage audience member. In general, the non-heritage attendee expects to be guided through a cultural narrative of a minority other that will be entertaining, aesthetically satisfying, and perhaps educational. As in all concert presentations, the audience assumes the presenter to be skilled and trustworthy, that is, able to ensure the credibility of the performers, to program pacing and variety within the comfort zone of the spectator, and in the case of cultural performance, to vouch for authenticity. The non-heritage individual may attend out of interest in the culture or in cultural diversity, or because of personal context or responding to global cultural events, the fact that Duterte is in the news all the time. That is, general audience members attend in the expectation of a positive experience of entertainment and culture. Whatever the motivation, their presence supports the validation of national tropes about diversity and enables moments of interaction within a minority community. The concert is a safe place to engage in cultural difference. It presents a familiar format for experiencing another culture, largely on mainstream terms. In the proscenium theater, the audience is effectively insulated from children running underfoot, transactions of food hawkers, or extraneous street noise. Although the concert may constitute an essentialized and idealized representation of a minority culture, nonetheless, it places on stage bodies, movements, and sounds that enact a people and therefore represent a nation. For the general audience member who has experienced more than one performance, each iteration may move him or her into the category of the knowledgeable aficionado, and perhaps eventually into the inner sanctum of the pundit. Thus, the concert is a space of inclusion in the negotiations of Filipinicity that can further refine degrees of engagement with this. Conclusion. This brief excursion into dancing and to a lesser degree musicking suggests ways in which performing genres can provide entree into the more general aspects of Filipino culture. For example, the inseparability of music and dance in Philippine practice might be an indication that other entities considered separate in the West may not be as separable elsewhere, like in the Philippines, such as loyalty to nation and loyalty to family, which is often problematized as cronyism and corruption. The notion of controlled indeterminacy I posit for streamers and banners resonates with rationales concerning other notions of indeterminacy. The rationale in Tagalog, bahala na, if God wills, expressed in the North as bahala na and in the South as inshallah, verbalizes an awareness of the limitations of the individual and his or her agency. The frequency of same-sex group dances reflect a greater predisposition for homosexuality as a social modus operandi. And you notice this at parties, that all the men go out in the garage and all the women are in the kitchen. And it's very comfortable this way. From the gaze of the Western outsider, the fact that men dance at all suggests a particular attitude toward the body, kinetic engagement, and modes of display. These are but a few ways in which an interrogation of music and dance can inform other domains of culture and perhaps lead to alternative understandings of foundational themes and core strategies concerning communities. Another aspect of Filipinicity are relevant to concerns of identity and subcultural functioning in overseas diasporic settings. Our brief discussions on notions of place in Philippine practice and strategies of space in the diaspora have wider implications for the more general concerns of well-being in a highly mobile present, the rationales for rootedness, mechanisms for personal and social identity, and skillful code switching within the diverse cultures of family, work, schooling, and affiliations. Finally, I see Filipinicity as an inductive means of identifying both cultural particularities and cross-cultural similarities, referring to the panel that we had earlier this afternoon. Looking beyond the Filipino archipelago as locale or as provenance for Filipinicity to the larger region of Southeast Asia, which Professor Nagata has outlined in her work, it is clear that there are features described for Filipinicity that occur elsewhere in Southeast Asia. The identity of home place through song is as much part of Indonesia's Bengawan Solo to celebrate the Bengawan River in Java, and Malaysia's Sayang Kinabalu to celebrate Mount Kinabalu as it is for the Pasig River in Mutinang Pasig. Homosexuality in performance, that is all men or all women, occurs in Aceh and the all-male Saman dance, which recently went for the Guinness World Record with 10,000 men dancing, and in Thailand with all-female Phon Ngu, the scarf dance. Although not presented today, musical improvisation based upon a skeletal melodic line is basic to the Javanese gamelan, the Thai pipot, and the Philippine kulintangan ensembles. As an ethnomusicologist, I am convinced that the study of performance genres can provide important insights for understanding a culture, particularly because in most cases, authority and agency resides with the native practitioner. If we think of other aspects of our lives, they are not coming from the indigenous side. As a Southeast Asianist, I consider performing arts as as a Southeast Asianist, I consider performing art genres as one of the promising touchstones for understanding the interconnections that give the region its intuitive coherence. Thank you for your attention and your patience.